Bibliophiles of the internet, my name is Audrey, and today I'm here to bring you my August wrap-up. So August was ARC August and Tome Topple. I did a little bit of both, much less than previous months, which I'm kind of happy about. Not much to update you all on this month. I did make my first ever original book tag for Cemetery Boys, which you should definitely share and check out. Cemetery Boys is actually available by the time you see this video, which is wild to think about, so you should get on it. But anyways, the first book I read in August was a reread of Avalon High by Meg Cabot. This is like a super deep cut. I know it's this YA contemporary fantasy story about Elle who's just moved to a new town and she's realizing that her new friends and classmates could possibly be modern reincarnations of the people from King Arthur's court. I'm actually not going to talk about this one because I reread it for a very specific reason, which is related to a project I was invited to take part in that hasn't been announced yet. But when it does come to pass, I will let y'all know, and in the meantime, I'm just going to save my thoughts for that project. In August, I also reread Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas twice. Listen, the first reread was from the ARC to help brainstorm for the Cemetery Boys book tag, and the second time was from the finished copy because ya boy just could not wait. My love for Cemetery Boys is the worst kept secret on the internet, so for now you can refer to my spoiler-free Own Voices reading blog if you want to hear all my thoughts. I will definitely be reading this again in September, and you can expect at least one more Cemetery Boys video from me in 2020, so look forward to that. Please notice all the caveats I put in that sentence. After that, it was Tome Topple, and I started off by listening to The Empire of Gold by S.A. Chakraborty, read by Sonila Nankani. This is the conclusion to the Daevabad trilogy. It's an epic historical fantasy about Nari, who starts off as a con woman living in Cairo who doesn't believe in magic but pretends to use magic in order to lure in her marks. One day, she accidentally summons an ancient Deva warrior, and the two of them find themselves on the run as they seek shelter in the mythical city of Brass. Content warnings for allusions to torture and graphic injury, graphic descriptions of surgery, incurred notions of racial supremacy, allusions to and descriptions of enslavement, descriptions of murder, some descriptions of mass terror and genocide, as well as blood and violence. I'm not going to get too much into it because I don't want to spoil anything, but I really enjoyed this final installment. Just like the first two books, it has such lively and vibrant characters, beautiful settings, fantastic sense of atmosphere, intense political drama, and just a dash of romance. This third book especially is set up to try and answer some very big questions about the long-term effects of colonization, how to bridge deep-seated intergenerational divisiveness, and how to help the society begin to heal from its traumatic past. I like how honest the story is about those challenges and saying that what we call peace is perhaps something these characters will never see in their lifetimes, but even so, it has to remain something they continue working towards. Daevabad is a society of people who cyclically conquer each other and constantly transfer power, so it's going to take a lot of work to make those injustices something of the past. For me, the endgame and the payoff at the end of this third book was definitely worth it, and if you can say that for a trilogy as epic and ambitious as the Daevabad trilogy, I feel like that's a success. I will say that this book is almost 800 pages, definitely the longest in the trilogy, and there was a part of me that felt like it took a little too long for the story to really get going and to get to the action and drama I was really craving. I just feel like the page space could have been maximized a little bit more, but at the same time, I feel like if I was the author writing this last book in this epic trilogy, I would also be a little bit indulgent and just write in everything I wanted to write, so I do get it in that sense. Like I said, I thought this was a wonderful ending to an unforgettable trilogy, and I gave this one 4.5 stars. My second choice for Tome Topple was Jade War by Fonda Lee, read by Andrew Kishino. This is the sequel to Jade City. It's an Own Voices, I believe Chinese-inspired urban fantasy series about the island of Kekon, which is run by two powerful clans known as the Mountain and No Peak. These two clans pretty much have the jade market cornered in Kekon, and jade is a magical element that can grant those who wear it heightened abilities and powers of a sort, but it can only be controlled by those who undergo years of traditional training first. In the first book, there's a new drug coming on the market known as SN1, which could potentially allow foreigners to also use jade without needing to be trained, which could potentially be the genesis of a new threat. Content warnings for cursory mentions of rape and assault, racial hate crimes, specifically destruction of property, allusions to the massacre of indigenous peoples, explorations of loss and grief, some use of ableist language, and scenes containing blood, murder, graphic injury, violence, and graphic sex. This is one of those times where I feel like I don't have the emotional capacity to fully express how fucking choice and excellent this book really is. The Greenbone saga is like a knife to the gut. The stakes are so incredibly high for these characters, and you want so much for them, even if they're being forced into making really bad choices. And Fonda Lee does such a good job of really bringing you into their perspective and and showing you what truly matters to these characters. This second book especially is really successful in expanding the world beyond K-Con and showing some of the outermost ripples these clans are causing for other countries, and to see how different cultures view Greenbones and the Kekanese. We see some of the Kekanese diaspora for the first time as well, and we get to see how differently they view jade as being part of their heritage as opposed to being a symbol of status or power or even birthright. And the depth of the relationship dynamics cuts me so deep because every relationship these characters have is inherently a political relationship, and that element of business and power takes precedence over everything else, no matter what. It's just such a masterful examination of the lines between love, loyalty, and filial piety, and how easily those lines can cross. So it becomes a question of how do they protect themselves, how do they protect the people they love, how do they protect their interests, how do they carve out an existence that means something, and how do they stay alive long enough to do it. The Call family especially has so deeply been rocked by loss and grief, and to see how far they've come and how much they've changed over the course of just one book is truly extraordinary. The way these clans exert power over each other and over their territories is so fascinating to read about as well, and it's so oddly gratifying to see what they're willing to sacrifice to advance their own interests and push beyond their limits. And towards the end especially, we're finally getting a broader look at jade as privilege, jade as a tool of oppression, jade as a means of maintaining and enforcing classism and tension between cultural groups. So after being so close to these families and these clans, it's going to be really interesting to see that different perspective, hopefully in the third book. I was completely floored and destroyed by this second installment, and I am now actively living in fear of what Jade Legacy could possibly hold, but I cannot wait. This for me was a definite 5 stars. Then to counterbalance those extremely intense tomes, I read my Patreon pick for August, which was You Had Me at Hola by Alexis Daria. It's an Own Voices Latinx adult romance about an actress named Jasmine who is Filipino and Puerto Rican American, and she just landed a major leading role on a bilingual television drama for a major streaming service that's basically the equivalent of Netflix. She is just coming off a very messy, very public breakup with a famous musician, and she really needs this show to go well if she wants to quote-unquote fix her image and get back in the public's good graces. At the last second, her co-star is unable to film the show, and the producers whisk in a popular Puerto Rican telenovela star, Ashton, who's worried that Hollywood is starting to phase him out as he gets older, which is why he's also determined to make this show a hit. Unfortunately, their first meeting does not go great, so the two of them try to work on their chemistry and connection between shoots, and we all know how that goes. Content warnings for explorations of past trauma, specifically stalking and a home break-in, divulsion of private information without consent, and graphic scenes containing sex. What I appreciate about this romance is that it has your standard steamy, flirty moments, but it also pulls in a lot of issues facing Latinx communities specifically. Whether it's the severe lack of on-screen representation in mainstream media, navigating life as part of the diaspora, not feeling connected to your second language, or even the double standard Latinx women face in the way they're portrayed to the public. Ashton is also actually a father, which is really nice to see. He's not really open about sharing things about his family life, especially in the beginning, but I still think it was interesting because sadly it's kind of rare to have parental figures also be shown as being desirable and romantic. I do wish he had been more upfront with Jasmine, especially about his kid, but that is an issue the story tries to tackle, and it kind of becomes part of Jasmine and Ashton learning to better communicate. There's also a really great exploration of Latinx gender roles, especially within the family unit. For Jasmine specifically, she's this really successful actress, but because of her line of work or the types of shows she works on, her family doesn't take her seriously, and if she's not like having a baby, they're not especially invested in her accomplishments. She and her cousins have this running joke about their abuelita secretly ranking all her favorite grandkids, and if you get pregnant or engaged, you automatically clinch the #1 spots. It really is like that sometimes, so it was really interesting to see Jasmine working through those insecurities and realizing that her desire to be appreciated as an actress is rooted in her desire to be appreciated as a daughter and a person first and foremost. The other notable thing about this story was the use of an intimacy coordinator on set. That was really fascinating to me to be able to see that process because they take time time to contextualize the scenes, ask why the scenes matter or what their purpose is. They explore what the characters are feeling while also taking into consideration what the actors are comfortable with and what they're not. And then they're also encouraged to create a ritual to help them break character, which is a really big thing. So even though Ashton and Jasmine are exploring their relationship beyond the cameras, they never cross that line while acting or shooting those scenes, which I think is really important. Ironically, I wasn't completely sold on the relationship. They came in really hard with the physical attraction and then took a while to get to the emotional connection, which is what I'm really about. And they do that thing where they have sex when they should be talking to each other, which is fine. I'm not going to complain about getting more sex scenes, but I still wanted to feel more from their emotional connection. So this kind of balanced out to being an extremely solid 3.5 stars. Then Penguin Teen had my back and kindly sent me a finished copy of Darius the Great Deserves Better by Adib Khorram, which, yes, for the record, I did read before the release date. This is the sequel to Darius the Great Is Not Okay, and it's an Own Voices queer YA contemporary story about Darius, a Persian-American teen who struggles with body image and has been diagnosed with depression. And in the first book, he and his family took a trip to Iran to spend some time with his ill grandfather, and they became closer because of it. Now they're back in Portland, and Darius's life is completely different. He just made the varsity soccer team, he has a boyfriend, and he has an internship working at a local tea shop, which, you know, for him is kind of perfect. But then he starts seeing that his parents are under a lot of stress, his sister is having trouble in school, his best friend Sorab is becoming harder to get a hold of, and he starts questioning his relationship with his boyfriend Landon as well. So the story becomes about him trying to navigate all those things. Content warnings for incurred bullying, racism, xenophobic comments, homophobic comments, descriptions of depressive episodes, death of a grandparent, and some non-graphic explorations of sex. This is one of my most anticipated books of 2020 by far, and I kind of felt two ways about it going into it because I was definitely excited to have more Darius content, but I was also curious to see if it would be as good as the first book. And now, having finished it, let me tell you, I am so glad this book exists. Both Darius books are so quietly affirming and soft in ways I can't even fully express, and it's just so nice to see Darius have such genuinely good relationships with the people around him and to see him have opportunities to authentically express his feelings. Like, he could be coming off the soccer pitch after losing a game and his dad will give him a kiss and tell him that he loves him and that he's proud of him, which fucking slaps. And yes, it's kind of sad that those simple remarks are notable to me because we still don't see enough stories where people express themselves in a way that's open and honest. But at the same time, even though Darius is really good about letting the people in his life know that he appreciates them, that doesn't mean his family is perfect. They still keep things to themselves, they still doubt themselves, and even though they're much better about it, they're still trying to learn how to better communicate. And I think the way depression especially is explored in the story is really thoughtful because it's just a part of Darius's life, and the story shows that just because he experiences depression doesn't mean he can't also experience happiness. There's a really beautiful moment where Darius describes happiness and depression as two different kinds of paint, and how the canvas of his life can be filled out using both colors because the two things can coexist. So it's really important to see how, yes, Darius has a lot of good things going on for him, but he can still be sad. He can still have a tendency to detach and feel self-doubt. And in that sense, I think it's so realistic that the things we love and care about the most cause us to doubt ourselves the most. And there's a really great distinction between when Darius should maybe examine a part of his life closer versus when his depression might be coloring the way he's experiencing things and making him feel like he's not good enough to have all that he has. There was also such a great dialogue about the importance of safe spaces and having people in your life who can affirm you when it's not all rainbows and butterflies. And I was also really impressed with how the story tackles toxic relationships. Specifically, there's some tension between Darius and his boyfriend Landon and how they're both trying to figure out what they value and what they want out of this relationship, and they don't always agree. That's normal, but there's a good way to go about it and an unhealthy way to go about it. And at the same time, Darius is also trying to navigate a budding friendship with his teammate Chip, who used to bully Darius in the past. So it raises all these questions about how to navigate forgiveness and whether someone being a good friend in the present negates the hurt they put you through before, and whether they are still capable of causing hurt. It's such a fine line to walk with both of those relationships, and it could have very easily gone wrong, but I think Adib Khorram played it perfectly, and I was really moved by where Darius lands by the end of the book. I didn't even get to touch on everything this book does extremely well because there's a lot of nuance, especially in navigating the intersections between queerness and Persian culture, but it was such an empowering, beautiful, emotional story, and I gave it 4.5 stars. Now, I am filming this a little bit early, so I'm currently reading my arc of Surrender Your Sons by Adam Sass. I will have to write a review for that one once I'm done anyway, so if that's available, I will link that down below for you to check out if you would like. So those are all the books I read in the month of August. If you've read any of them yourself, or if you plan to, feel free to drop down in the comments below and let me know your thoughts. But that's everything I have for this wrap up today. Until next time, educate yourself, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page.